This week for New Delhi has been extremely hectic when it comes to diplomacy. It started with Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Russia on Monday and ended with the foreign minister's retreat of the BIMSTEC here in New Delhi, organized and hosted by India. The BIMSTEC, or the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, has 7 countries, and the representative of Sri Lanka is the Honorable Minister Tharaka Balasuriya. He's the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs who represented Sri Lanka and is now here talking with us at the print. Thank you, Minister, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, to start with, the last few months when we look at Sri Lanka, quite a few very important things happen, especially when we talk about the finances in June.
Yeah.
There was the agreement signed with the official creditor committee for restructuring of debt. The IMF's 300 million they promised to release, that will take it up to about $1 billion in aid. So I just want to understand, when we're looking at the debt situation in Sri Lanka and all of this positive news coming out, and connecting it with the election scheduled for later this year, the presidential elections and then the parliamentary elections, what is the sort of position of the country when we're looking at the economic situations?
Well, I think, most things are back to normal. I think if you visit Sri Lanka, you will see a very vibrant country. But we are not out of the woods. We have restructured our debts. And now we have a little bit of breathing space, and during that the breathing space we need to go for things such as new revenue streams. But as far as the debt goes, until 2028, we will have some space. So that's why but also in order to come over here, the government of Sri Lanka had to take very difficult decisions. We had to reduce subsidies, we had to go for cost-based pricing, we had to restrict the public sector or even reduce the public sector, we had to increase taxes. So they were not very popular decisions, but decisions nonetheless which we had to take in order to steady the ship. Of course, as I mentioned, this is only the start, but now what we need to do is, to realize Sri Lanka's the potential in terms of new revenue streams, maybe through energy sales to India, maybe through by increasing logistic operations and using our the position, location, and attracting investors.
Right. And one thing, at least in the last few years, has been the deepening of ties between India and Sri Lanka. The Indian External Affairs Minister's first bilateral visit since reassuming his standalone visit was to Sri Lanka. And in that we saw this Maritime Rescue Coordination Center that was inaugurated. And then, deeper maritime naval cooperation. There was a floating dock that was inaugurated last year, the Dornier aircraft maritime surveillance. So I just want to understand, how is Sri Lanka and India looking at cooperation in future when it comes to maritime surveillance and security?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think Sri Lanka and India has very good ties. Historically, we have had very good ties. Sometimes you have bumps in a relationship, so that doesn't undermine the ties when you look at it from a lengthy perspective. So I think the maritime cooperation is absolutely important to Sri Lanka, and these are steps in the right direction that will strengthen the maritime ties between Sri Lanka and India. So we are very happy that we are working with the Indian government in order to strengthen the Sri Lanka's potential in this regard.
Right, and the reason I bring this up, because this brings in the China factor for at least in New Delhi's thinking, right? And this is something in December, there were reports in the Indian media that the Sri Lankan government has put a moratorium on Chinese research vessels from stopping at its ports.
So no, we have not put a moratorium on Chinese research vessels.
into the ports.
We have put a moratorium on all research vessels, from every country.
Right.
Yeah. So go ahead.
So, putting it into that context is where do you see the ties in that greater context of India and China? How is it viewed from Sri Lanka in this sense?
As one of your foreign secretaries mentioned that he sees Sri Lanka as a aircraft carrier off the coast of India, and which I agree. So we are very mindful of that, and we want to ensure that the Indians are quite secure in their thinking that Sri Lanka will not utilize China, or for that matter any other country, to use Sri Lanka in order to threaten India's security. So the moratorium was not only for the Chinese vessels, but it was for all vessels. So as far as the surveillance goes, that we are developing our own capabilities. My minister was in Japan, and the Japanese government has promised to give a grant in terms of a surveillance ship to do our own surveillance. So we are developing our own capabilities in that regard. So as I mentioned, that we are very careful to make sure that India's security in no uncertain terms are threatened by other countries. Sri Lanka being used as a pawn or whatever. Having said that, but we are open for business when it comes for all other countries. Security aspect is a different aspect, but the economic aspect is a different aspect. So we want to trade with not just with India, but we want to trade with China. We are discussing a PTA with Bangladesh. We are discussing a PTA and FTA with Indonesia. With Thailand, we are looking at an FTA with Thailand. Now, if you look at the BIMSTEC, BIMSTEC itself is looking at an FTA with all the 7 countries. So we want to integrate with the supply chains of the world and connect to these supply chains so that the people in Sri Lanka will prosper.
Right, sir. And the countries you mentioned, Bangladesh, Thailand, except for Indonesia, they're all BIMSTEC members.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question: is when you're looking at BIMSTEC, it's about between 20 to 25% of Sri Lanka's trade comes from countries in the BIMSTEC region. Sri Lanka is also a member of SAARC, which is more a regional political bloc. BIMSTEC has a core economic agenda. So how do you see, BIMSTEC going forward in the future, and vis-a-vis the experience of SAARC as a similar yet different regional bloc for Sri Lanka's interests?
Well, I think the key component is political will. Okay, I don't think that the SAARC succeeded because I don't think there was enough political will for the SAARC to succeed. But whereas if you look at with the BIMSTEC, I think there is enough political will from all the 7 countries for the BIMSTEC to succeed. So as long as there's political will, then that can be put into action.
Right. And my final questions, just sort of circling back to the economy to sort of tie up the whole conversation. This year, between January and July, I think about 2 lakh Indians have traveled to Sri Lanka
Yes.
already. There's a lot of promotion of Sri Lankan tourism. UPI now is available. I think there's a tie-up between a couple of companies between India and Sri Lanka. So how do you see this sort of expanding the tourism, the business tourism? How do you see this expanding between India and Sri Lanka going forward, and how important is it for Sri Lanka?
It's a natural expansion. I think if you look at Sri Lanka's the tourists, maybe a few years back, we used to depend mainly on the Western tourists. But research has shown that mainly about 60 to 70% of tourists come from destinations which are about 1.5 hours flying time, and close to 90% of tourists come from destinations which are within a radius of 4 hours flying time. If you look at let's say France, where do most tourists to France come from? They come from either Germany, or they come from Spain, or they come from England. If you look at Spain, it's the same thing. Where do the tourists come from? Either Germany or France or from England. Yeah. So similarly, I think Sri Lanka needs to look at India as a much bigger market. You all have 1.4 billion people, and I think the 200,000 tourists is very, very, very small percentage. And also, I think the patterns in in India are traveling. The tourist patterns in India are also changing. Earlier, what we saw is we saw a lot of families. When Asians travel, usually they used to travel with their families. But now you see a lot of boyfriends and girlfriends and college kids coming to Sri Lanka. So I think it's a very positive sign. And I think that as far as tourism goes, is what we have scratched is just it's at the surface, and there's a whole lot more potential which we can get from India in this regard. And I certainly think that there's something for everybody in Sri Lanka. So if you ever have you visited Sri Lanka?
Yes,
Okay.
Asia Cup 2004, the finals
Oh,
that Sri Lanka won.
Oh, that's a long time back. But I suggest you to visit Sri Lanka now, and you will see that we have the wildlife parks, and we have marine. We have the blue whales and the dolphins and all those things. We have the hill country, and then we have the historical sites, the 2,000-year-old stupas. And it's bustling, and of course we have the beaches. So I think if you visit Sri Lanka, I'm sure you will recommend Sri Lanka to the other Indians too. And so I suggest that and now you're from Chennai, and so the flying time from Chennai to Sri Lanka is 1 hour. Flying time from Chennai to Delhi is longer than that. Flying time from Chennai to Madurai is also 1 hour, and that's within the Tamil Nadu. So I think when you look at the flying times and all that, in Sri Lanka is very close to India, and I certainly think the Indians should make use of this opportunity and visit Sri Lanka in numbers.
Right, sir. That was my last question. Thank you, Minister, for joining us on The Print today.
Thank you for having me.